There is a moment in every man's life when the universe stops whispering and decides to scream right in his face. For me, that scream came not on a battlefield, but in the quiet of my own kitchen, disguised as a harmless text message. Before we get into it, I have a quick question for you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It always amazes me how far these stories travel. Now, what you are about to hear is a fictional story, but the lessons embedded in it about family, deception, and the danger of underestimating a quiet man are as real as it gets. Don't let greed trap you, and if you enjoy the story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I still remember the exact sound my phone made that Tuesday night. It was a sharp ping that cut through the steady rhythm of the rain against my kitchen window. I had just poured myself a cup of cheap black coffee and settled into the old oak chair I'd rebuilt myself. My right knee was throbbing, a lingering souvenir from my time in a specialized military reconnaissance unit. Most people in my neighborhood, Beaverdale, just saw me as Rob Whitaker, the 61-year-old handyman. They saw the faded flannel shirts and the battered 2008 Ford F-150. They hired me to fix their leaky pipes. They didn't know about the decades I spent conducting threat assessments and dismantling hostile networks. They just saw a quiet widower doing honest labor, and that was exactly how I wanted it. After my wife Nora passed away 9 years ago, I packed away my old life. I dedicated every breath to raising our daughter, Emily. I paid for her braces, her college tuition, the deposit on her first apartment, and recently, a massive chunk of her upcoming wedding. Emily was marrying a man named Chase. Chase was polished, slick, and wealthy. He wore custom-tailored suits and drove a spotless black BMW to Chase. I was just a blue-collar handyman. My phone buzzed again. 3 days before the wedding, I opened the text, "Dad, please don't ask about Chase's parents anymore. They won't be at the wedding. It's better if you don't meet them." I read it twice. The kitchen suddenly felt suffocatingly quiet. I had asked Emily multiple times about Chase's family, but she'd give vague answers about how they were private people. Not attending the wedding. That was a massive red flag. I typed a reply. "Okay, just one word, no questions, no guilt, no argument." 30 minutes later, Emily called. "Dad, you aren't upset, are you?" Her voice was forced. "Chase's family has complicated history. I just figured parents usually meet before their kids stand at an altar," I replied. "You'll understand someday," she said quickly. "Don't forget dinner tomorrow night. Love you." She had evaded the question completely. My instincts were screaming. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The next evening, I drove my old Ford to the restaurant Chase had selected. It was modern, all polished wood and dim lighting. I wore a navy blazer I'd bought years ago. Emily greeted me with a tight hug, looking radiant but strained. Then Chase arrived, strolling in like he owned the building. "Rob," he said, shaking my hand firmly. He never called me Mr. Whitaker. It was a subtle power play. Dinner proceeded with agonizing politeness. Chase bragged about a commercial property deal. I waited until the waiter cleared our plates. "So," I began calmly, "when do I finally get to meet your folks?" Emily flinched. Chase dabbed his mouth. "Rob, my family has some old wounds. I hope you care enough about Emily not to dig into things that cause her pain." It was a brilliant psychological pivot. He turned my question into a selfish act. Emily looked at me pleadingly. "They come from a different world, Dad. I don't want anything to get awkward." Awkward. She was talking about me, the handyman. She was terrified her sophisticated future in-laws would look down on her father. For the first time since Nora died, a sharp pain twisted in my chest. "I suppose we all want the day to go smoothly," I said evenly. Chase smirked, a tiny, victorious curling of his lips. He thought he had bullied the old handyman into submission. That was his fatal mistake. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I drove home taking the longest route. Around 10 o'clock, my laptop chimed, an email from the wedding planner. The subject line read, "Updated seating draft." It was clearly an accidental forward. I scrolled through the tables. My cursor stopped dead over table 4G. Mercer M. I blinked. 2 reserved seats. The planner hadn't marked them absent. Someone expected G and M. Mercer to be there, which meant someone had lied. I printed the chart. The next morning, I was at the Polk County Assessor's office. I searched for corporate entities and typed Mercer LLC. One entry caught my eye. Mercer Family Holdings LLC. The managing member was Glenn A. Mercer, registered address, Ankeny. Less than 20 minutes from my front door, I drove to Ankeny. The neighborhood was quiet, entrenched wealth. I parked a block away, pulled out compact binoculars, and waited. 45 minutes later, Chase's black BMW pulled into the driveway. Emily stepped out laughing. The front door opened. A woman in her 60s hurried down the steps, Marcia. Emily threw her arms around her. Glenn Mercer followed, clapping Chase on the shoulder. They looked like the perfect family, no complicated history, only a devastating lie, and my daughter was actively participating in it. I stayed 3 cars back as they drove to a high-end bistro. I grabbed a newspaper and sat in a booth near them. I isolated their audio. After the wedding, he'll come around, Marcia purred. The house is the cleanest asset. My jaw clenched. My house. Glenn leaned forward. We need to ensure the LLC structure is watertight. Old cases don't come back unless someone pays to dig. Chase slid a stack of legal documents toward Emily. She signed the bottom of the page blindly. The heading read, Family Asset Transfer and Marital Planning. Mercer Family Holdings LLC. This was a hostile takeover masked as a marriage. Then, Marcia lowered her voice with a sinister smirk. Prairie Willow taught us one thing. People forget. When they're tired enough, the old man will roll over just like the others. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers. Prairie Willow, the post-operative facility where Nora had been sent after hip surgery. The place where, due to a massive medical error, she had died 9 years ago. I threw a $20 bill on the table and walked out. This wasn't about a greedy fiancé anymore. This was about the people who had killed my wife. The drive back to Beaverdale from the restaurant felt entirely too short. My mind, trained to process high-stress variables in combat scenarios, was now applying those same cold calculations to my own family. The rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers did nothing to wash away the visceral image of Chase sliding those documents across the table. Family asset transfer. They weren't just greedy. They were systematic. They had orchestrated this entire relationship as a corporate acquisition. When I finally pulled my battered Ford F-150 into the driveway, the house was dark. It was the same quiet, modest home Nora and I had bought 30 years ago. It held the echoes of our lives, Emily's first steps, Nora's laughter, the quiet evenings by the fireplace. And now, a predator was trying to snatch the deed from my daughter's hands. I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight down the narrow hallway to the linen closet. I pushed aside extra blanketists, a dusty humidifier, and a box of old Christmas decorations until my hands found the heavy plastic storage bin tucked in the back corner. I had promised myself 9 years ago, after the agonizing legal battles and the crushing weight of grief had finally broken me, that I would never open this bin again. It held the darkest chapter of my life. I dragged it out, the plastic scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, and hauled it to the kitchen table. The harsh overhead light illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. My hands hovered over the lid. They were shaking. Not from the arthritis that occasionally flared up in my joints, and certainly not from fear. They were shaking with the raw, volatile energy of a dormant volcano preparing to erupt. I took a deep, steadying breath, utilizing a combat breathing technique to lower my heart rate, and popped the lid. I started pulling out manila folders, each one thick with the sterile, bureaucratic documentation of a tragedy. There were itemized medical bills that stretched into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. There were physical therapy logs detailing Nora's initial, hopeful progress after her hip replacement. There were sterile letters from insurance companies denying coverage and endless, exhausting correspondence from our attorneys advising me to settle because we simply couldn't outspend the corporate legal team. I read through the grueling history of Nora's last days. The memories flooded back, sharp and agonizing. The smell of the antiseptic in the Prairie Willow corridors. The patronizing tone of the doctors who insisted that complications happen. The devastating moment the heart monitor flatlined. I forced myself to push the grief aside and focus on the intelligence gathering. I dug deeper into the stack, searching for anything that connected the dots I had just drawn in that diner. Then, near the bottom of the bin, Tucked between two insurance denials, I found an internal memo from Prairie Willow that Patricia Wells, the head nurse, had secretly slipped to me years ago. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. I smoothed it out on the table and stared at the signature at the bottom. My breathing hitched. In neat, precise blue ink, the signature read, Marcia Merritt, Administrative Director. Marcia Merritt, Marcia Mercer. I slowly lowered myself into the oak chair. The rain tapped against the window pane, oblivious to the fact that the past had just violently kicked down my front door. This wasn't a coincidence. The universe doesn't deal in coincidences of this magnitude. Chase's mother hadn't merely crossed paths with my family. She was the chief architect of the facility where my wife had died due to horrific administrative oversight. They had settled the lawsuit, buried the evidence, and simply changed their names to wash the blood from their hands. And now, their son was sleeping next to my daughter. I picked up my phone. It was past midnight, but I didn't care. I dialed my sister-in-law, Carol. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. Rob, what's wrong? Is Emily okay? I need you to tell me everything you remember about the administration at Prairie Willow, I said, my voice eerily calm, the tone of a commander ordering an airstrike. Carol was silent for a long moment. I could hear her shifting in bed, turning on a lamp. When she finally spoke, the sleep was gone, replaced by old hardened anger. Why are we talking about this now, Rob? It's been 9 years. Because I just watched Emily's future mother-in-law, Marcia Mercer, brag about how people forget when they're tired enough. I found the old memo, Carol. Marcia Merritt is Marcia Mercer. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Oh my God, Carol whispered. I knew it. I told you that woman was poison. The moment I met Chase, I felt something was off, but I couldn't place it. It's the eyes. He has her dead, calculating eyes. Tell me what you remember about her. She terrified people, Rob, the nurses, the patients, even our own lawyers treaded lightly around her. She didn't manage that facility. She ruled it with an iron fist. Glenn handled the finances, but Marcia handled the fear. She was obsessed with the bottom line. If a patient needed extra care that cost too much, Marcia found a way to discharge them or cut their resources. When Nora died, Marcia was the one who stonewalled us. She was the one who made the medical records disappear for months. Why did we stop fighting them, Carol? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. Why did I sign that paper? Carol sighed, a heavy, exhausted sound that echoed my own feelings from a decade ago. Because you were broken, Rob. You were exhausted, you were grieving, and you were terrified of losing this house and leaving Emily with nothing. They delayed everything. Key employees suddenly suffered from amnesia. They starved us out emotionally and financially, and then they offered just enough money to cover the mounting bills. They didn't convince us they were innocent. They convinced us we couldn't afford to prove they were guilty. They weaponized my grief, I murmured. Exactly, Carol said, but listen to me carefully. If you want the absolute truth, the kind of truth that holds up in the light of day, you need to find Patricia Wells. The head nurse? Yes, she was the only one who wasn't afraid of Marcia. She tried to help us, but her hands were tied by non-disclosure agreements and the fear of losing her pension. If she's still alive, she'll remember every dirty secret that place buried. The next morning, I didn't go to the hardware store. I didn't fix the leaky faucet at Mrs. Higgins' house. I spent the entire morning utilizing every investigative tool I had retained from my military days to track down Patricia Wells. It took 4 hours of cross-referencing public databases, voter registrations, and property records. But I finally located her. She was living in a modest senior living complex in Urbandale. I drove there in the early afternoon. The complex was a drab, brick building from the late 80s, but it was meticulously maintained. Flower pots lined the concrete walkways, and tiny American flags were planted proudly by the entrance. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon pledge and boiled cabbage. When I knocked on the door of apartment 214, I didn't know what to expect. The door was opened by a woman leaning heavily on a silver walker. She wore a bright floral blouse and a shade of red lipstick that stubbornly defied her 72 years. She studied me with sharp, intelligent eyes that hadn't dulled a bit. "You look familiar," she said bluntly, her voice raspy. But the years have definitely added some miles. I'm Rob Whitaker, I said quietly. My wife was Nora. Her expression shifted instantly. The tough exterior melted, replaced by deep, profound sympathy. Oh, honey, she breathed. She stepped back. With one hand, come inside, let me look at you. Her apartment was small but incredibly warm, crowded with knitted throw blankets and framed family photographs. A small radio in the kitchen played classic country music softly in the background. We sat in her living room, and she offered me a plate of homemade cookies. I declined, eager to get straight to the point. I need to ask you about Marcia Merritt, I said. Patricia let out a dry, humorless laugh. She folded her hands in her lap, her knuckles swollen with arthritis. Oh, I knew Marcia. Everyone who ever worked a shift at Prairie Willow knew Marcia. She walked the halls in high heels that clicked like a metronome. Whenever we heard those footsteps, the entire floor stopped talking. Nobody wanted to be caught in her crosshairs. I pulled a small notebook from my jacket pocket. What really happened to Nora, Patricia? The official report stated it was an unpredictable, post-operative complication. Patricia looked me straight in the eye, unflinching. Your wife wasn't the only family that asked difficult questions, Rob. There were medication mistakes, far more than there ever should have been. The staff was overworked, chronically undertrained, and utterly terrified to report errors, because Marcia would fire them on the spot to protect the facility's liability. Were the errors covered up? I asked, my pen hovering over the paper. They were cleaned up, Patricia corrected precisely. Reports were rewritten. Timestamps on charts were magically altered. Missing initials mysteriously appeared days after the fact. I never personally saw anyone forge a medical chart, but I saw plenty of paperwork become incredibly tidy right before state health inspections. She stood up slowly, navigating her walker toward a dented metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room. She pulled out a thick manila envelope and dropped it on the coffee table between us. I kept a few things, she said, tapping the envelope. Not confidential patient records. I wouldn't cross that ethical line. But internal memos, staff newsletters, administrative directives. Things that establish a clear, undeniable pattern of behavior. She pulled out a photocopy and handed it to me. It was a memo titled Directive for Reconciling Medication Logs prior to external review. At the bottom was Marcia's signature. It's not a smoking gun, Patricia admitted, but it proves their priority was presentation, not patient care. They valued the bottom line over human lives. They created an environment where covering up a mistake was rewarded, and reporting a mistake was punished. I stared at the memo, the puzzle pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. Did you ever see a young boy around the facility? Marcia's son, Chase? Patricia nodded slowly, her expression darkening. Yes, when he was a teenager, 15 or 16 maybe. His parents claimed he was helping out after school. Running errands, making copies. But there was an incident that told me exactly who that boy was going to become. I leaned forward. What kind of incident? A resident's daughter was frantic, trying to locate some missing financial documents regarding her mother's personal checking account. The administration claimed they had no record of it. Later that afternoon, I walked into the back office to grab some supplies, and I found Chase sitting at a desk, practicing the elderly resident's signature on a piece of scratch paper. A cold chill ran down my spine. The manipulation, the forgery, it wasn't just a learned behavior. It was practically a family tradition. Did you report him? I tried. Patricia sighed, looking defeated. I took the scratch paper to Marcia. She laughed in my face. She said it was just a boy being mischievous, practicing calligraphy. No one was willing to lose their job over it. Sometimes, Rob, people don't become monsters overnight. They grow up in houses where rules belong to other people, and they are taught from a very young age that deception is just good business. Before I left, Patricia reached into the envelope one last time. I think you need to take this with you. It's a matter of public record now, but it paints a very clear picture of exactly who your daughter is marrying. She handed me a multi-page document. It was a civil complaint filed just 3 years ago. The defendants listed were Chase Merritt and Glenn Mercer. The plaintiff was an 80-year-old widow, according to the exhaustive legal filing. Chase and Glenn had systematically pressured the grieving woman into signing away her home to an LLC for a fraction of its market value, promising to handle her burdensome finances. The case had been settled quietly out of court. No admission of guilt, just another vulnerable family paid off to go away. I folded the document carefully and placed it in my jacket pocket alongside the Prairie Willow memo. The grief and exhaustion that had plagued me for 9 years vanished completely, replaced by the cold, calculated precision of a man preparing for a scorched earth campaign. This was no longer just about protecting Emily from a bad marriage or a greedy fiancé. This was a rescue mission. Patricia walked me to the door. She rested a frail, trembling hand on my arm. "Rob," she said softly, her eyes filled with profound sorrow. "If your daughter marries into that family, they won't just take her money and her house." I looked at her, waiting for the rest. "They'll destroy her soul," she whispered, "and they'll teach her to call it love." I walked back to my truck, my boots crunching heavily on the gravel. I climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They thought they were dealing with a tired, broken old handyman who would roll over and surrender. They were about to find out exactly what kind of skills a military intelligence operative retains when you threaten the only family he has left. I drove back to Beaverdale with cold, calculated precision. I called Denise Kaplan, a sharp 57-year-old corporate attorney who had handled my will. Her office smelled of old leather and intimidation. I briefed her on the entire situation, the seating chart, the stakeout, the asset transfer documents, and the Prairie Willow connection. "Is it that bad?" I asked when I finished. "It's bad enough that you need to be extraordinarily careful," Denise said. "If you walk into the rehearsal dinner tomorrow and accuse them of murder, you will look unstable. Grief gives dishonest people a convenient costume to put on you. We make this about current financial disclosure. If Chase refuses to disclose his LLC connections, his refusal becomes the weapon. We force the conversation by offering a generous wedding gift, a legal and financial consultation. It's a trap disguised as a blessing, I realized. "Exactly, call your daughter," I dialed Emily. "Dad, what did you do?" she snapped instantly. "Chase says you were parked outside his parents' house. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to learn my daughter lied to my face about people living 20 minutes away?" I countered. "You're trying to ruin this because you never moved on after Mom died," she yelled. I gripped the phone. "I didn't call to fight. I want to give you and Chase a wedding gift. A comprehensive legal planning session with my attorney, Denise Kaplan. Bring Chase tomorrow morning. We'll put everything on the table." "Fine," she snapped. Friday morning, Chase arrived in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, exuding arrogant confidence. Emily looked pale and exhausted. Chase smiled warmly at Denise. "Thank you for making time. Rob can be very protective. Protecting assets is my job," Denise said smoothly. "Rob asked me to help clarify the estate planning, specifically regarding the potential transfer of family property." Chase leaned forward greedily. "Transparency is crucial when there's a valuable home involved." "Actually," Denise said, her voice dropping, "before we discuss Rob's assets, we need documentation of all your business interests, pending legal claims and LLC connections." Chase forced a laugh. "That's standard boilerplate language. I don't see how it applies. Mercer Family Holdings LLC would be one example," Denise stated coldly. The color drained from Chase's face. He recovered quickly. "That is private family business. If it's private, then full disclosure shouldn't be a problem," Denise countered. Emily turned to him. "Chase, what is she talking about?" Chase grabbed Emily's hand. "Baby, your father is turning a gift into an interrogation to stop the wedding." He stood up abruptly. "I need to take a call." He stepped into the hallway, but didn't pull the heavy door completely shut. "They're asking about Mercer Holdings," he hissed into his phone. "No, I didn't tell her that part." Emily stared at the open door in horror. "What part?" She whispered to me. I just looked at her with all the love and sorrow I possessed. Chase walked back in, smiling perfectly. "Sorry, work emergency." Emily stood up. The fragile illusion had shattered. "I need time," she breathed. Chase froze. "What?" "I need time," she repeated, pulling her arm free from his sudden grip. She walked out of the office. Chase turned to me, his eyes filled with venom. You don't know what you're doing, old man. I stood up, letting the handyman act drop to reveal the hardened operative underneath. No, but I'm a very fast learner. That night at 9:37 p.m., Denise called me. I ran a deep financial scrub on Mercer Family Holdings LLC. They applied for a massive commercial bridge loan using an anticipated family asset transfer as collateral. They borrowed against my house. Exactly, Denise said. They are hemorrhaging money on bad investments. Your daughter is the crucial paperwork they need for a financial rescue mission. The fury inside me solidified into something unbreakable. I was going to burn their entire world to the ground. Friday evening arrived. The rehearsal dinner at the high-end steakhouse looked immaculate. Amber lighting, white tablecloths. To an outsider, it was a picture-perfect gathering. Emily looked beautiful but hollow. Chase worked the room, flashing brilliant smiles. Glenn and Marcia arrived like peace. Chase introduced them to Emily's friends as very close, old family friends. No last names, just enough truth wrapped in a sickening lie. Glenn extended a manicured hand to me. Nice to finally meet you. I stared at it before taking it. A pleasure, I said flatly. Carol slipped into the seat next to me. You ready to take out the trash? She whispered. 20 minutes later, Denise Kaplan walked into the room with unquestionable authority. She placed a stack of sealed envelopes next to my water glass. No surprises, let the documents speak. Chase stood up to give his toast, tapping his crystal flute. When I met Emily, I knew I had found someone who believed in honesty, integrity, and absolute trust. Carol snorted loudly. A ripple of nervous laughter spread. Chase finished his toast and sat down, looking immensely satisfied. I pushed my chair back slowly. The screech cut through the chatter. I stood to my full height, waiting until every eye was locked onto me. I'd like to say a few words, I announced with military command. Emily looked panicked. I kept my gaze fixed on Chase and his parents. When Emily told me about this wedding, I was excited to meet her new family. I was later informed Chase's parents were unable to attend due to a complicated history. Guests exchanged confused glances. Imagine my profound surprise when I discovered they not only were attending tonight, but they have been living less than 20 minutes from my front door this entire time. The room went dead silent. Chase's smile vanished into a furious grimace. Rob, there seems to be a misunderstanding. I assure you, I understand perfectly, I replied. Marcia let out a condescending laugh. We are simply very private people. I respect privacy, I said, holding up the seating chart. I do not respect deception. I picked up the envelopes and handed one to Emily, Chase, Glenn, Marcia, and the officiant. Open them. Emily tore hers open first. Inside were the Mercer Family Holdings LLC registration, the bridge loan application listing my home as collateral, and the civil complaint detailing their fraud against the elderly widow, Suctence. Chase's face turned an ugly red. This proves absolutely nothing, he shouted. It proves far more than you ever intended for this room to know, Denise stated calmly. Marcia shoved the papers back. This is targeted harassment. Chase lunged forward, pointing a shaking finger at me. This is because you can't let go of the past. You blame my family for your wife's death. The room gasped. I didn't raise my voice. I blame your family for hiding from it. Before Chase could shout another defense, the heavy double doors swung open. Patricia Wells moved slowly into the room, her walker squeaking softly. Carol flanked her like a bodyguard. Patricia stopped a few feet from the Mercer's table, staring directly at Marcia. Hello, Marcia, Patricia said, her voice raspy but steady. The confidence drained from Marcia's face. I haven't seen you in years, not since Prairie Willow, Patricia confirmed. I always wondered if you'd ever have the courage to tell people who you used to be. You knew me well enough to force me to rewrite 3 separate incident reports to cover your facility's lethal negligence. A shocked murmur rippled through the guests. Glenn stepped forward. That's enough. Patricia didn't blink. You always did let other people clean up your messes, Glenn. Chase completely lost control. He grabbed Emily's wrist roughly. This is ridiculous. We're leaving right now. Emily looked at his hand, then at his face. Let go of me, she said quietly. Chase tightened his grip. I said we're leaving. Emily ripped her arm free. No. She looked at the documents, at Marcia, and finally turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears. Dad, she whispered. She held up the Prairie Willow memo. What does this mean? What happened to Mom? I let the silence stretch. She deserved the cold, heavy truth. Your mother went into Prairie Willow to recover from a routine surgery, I said steadily. She never came home. Emily's shoulders began to shake. I turned my gaze to Glenn and Marcia. I spent 9 years wondering if the medical errors were just tragic accidents. They weren't. They settled the case to silence me, changed their names, and moved on looking for new victims. But I never forgot your mother, and I will not let them destroy you the way they destroyed her. No one spoke. The rehearsal dinner had ended, suffocated by the crushing weight of the truth. Guests quietly picked up their coats. Emily sat frozen. Chase paced frantically. Emily, none of this proves anything. He's poisoning you. Denise stepped forward. Documents don't poison people. Chase, lies do. Glenn grabbed Marcia's arm, and they hurried toward the doors in disgrace. You know what bothered me the most, Marcia? Patricia called after them. It was that you taught everyone to fear the truth more than they feared the mistakes. They pushed through the doors without looking back. Chase knelt beside Emily. Baby, please, you know me. I thought I did, she said softly. She pulled her hand away. Did you know about Prairie Willow? Chase hesitated. I knew they owned a facility years ago, but it wasn't relevant to our wedding. I was protecting you from his paranoia. No, Emily said. You were protecting your access to my inheritance. You let me look my father in the eye and lie to him. Chase sneered viciously. You are making a massive mistake. She stood up. I already did. Saturday morning arrived strangely quiet. There were no florist trucks, no caterers rushing around. Instead, phones rang. Emily spent the entire morning calling the wedding planner, the photographer, and the venue. The wedding was officially canceled. No elaborate explanations were given, just reality. The fallout over the next few weeks was swift and brutal. Denise Kaplan forwarded the publicly available documents and Patricia's sworn statement to the appropriate regulatory boards and commercial investors. When light hits the dark corners of a corrupt business, the roaches scatter. 2 major investment deals Chase was brokering collapsed within days. The bridge loan was immediately denied. Investigators began looking into Mercer Holdings, and soon, other victims started coming forward. Emily didn't visit me for 13 days. On the 13th afternoon, I heard her Honda pull into my driveway. She stepped out wearing an oversized college hoodie, looking utterly exhausted. She looked exactly like the 19-year-old girl who had cried in this same driveway after losing her mother. I opened the front door. Hi, Em. We stood there for a moment before her face crumpled. I'm so sorry, Dad. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat at the kitchen table where I had unearthed the Prairie Willow documents. I kept trying to convince myself you were just being overprotective, she admitted, staring at her mug. I thought you hated Chase because he wasn't like you. I never hated him, Emily, I said softly. I feared him. She wiped a tear. I should have listened. Instead, I lied to you. I thought if we could just get through the wedding. She took a deep breath. I owe a lot of money, Dad. The cancellation fees for the venue, the catering, it's ruining me. I've paid what I can from my savings, but I was wondering. She didn't have to finish. I love my daughter more than my own life, and that was exactly why I had to answer the way I did. I already paid what I promised for the deposits, Emily, I said gently. She lowered her eyes. I know I am not paying the rest. She nodded, not angry, just incredibly sad. I understand. I will help you make a strict budget, I continued, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. I will help you find a good therapist. I will help you move into a smaller apartment. But I will not use my hard-earned pension or your mother's memory to financially rescue you from the consequences of choices you made after you stopped listening to the truth. More tears fell, but she squeezed my hand back. I don't deserve that kindness, Dad. This isn't kindness, Emily, it's a boundary. Over the next 6 months, Emily moved into a tiny studio apartment. She took a second job doing freelance graphic design to slowly pay off the remaining debt. She started seeing a therapist Denise recommended. Healing isn't a movie montage. It's a grueling, slow process that happens one honest conversation at a time. But she was rebuilding herself, and our relationship was growing stronger because of it. A month after the canceled wedding, I drove my old truck to the cemetery. The air was crisp, with approaching autumn, I brought a bouquet of simple white chrysanthemums. I knelt by her headstone, my knee popping loudly. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered. I smiled as the wind rustled the oak trees. Took me long enough to figure it out. I told her about Emily's progress, the Mercers facing federal investigations, and Patricia's bravery. Then I just sat in silence, feeling a profound sense of peace. These days my house is quiet again. I still drive the battered F-150, but something fundamental inside me has shifted. For years, I had confused sacrifice with love. I believed being a good father meant absorbing every blow so my daughter would never feel hardship. I was wrong, sometimes. The absolute greatest protection a parent can offer is the courage to say no before it's too late. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's just permission. And permission is exactly what predators like Chase spend their lives searching for. Looking back, the greatest victory wasn't that the wedding didn't happen, or that the Mercers were exposed. The greatest victory was that the truth finally had room to breathe. I couldn't change what had happened to Nora, but I refused to let silence destroy the daughter I still had. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking a difficult truth, you know exactly how heavy that burden is. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my position? Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay sharp and protect your own.